Hi there, and a warm welcome to this, the 238th edition of DF Direct Weekly, which is and shall always remain, until death presumably, our weekly show discussing the latest gaming and technology news. Lots to get through this week. First of all, joining me, John Linneman. Hello.
Yes, Rich. We're all here today. There's a lot of good stuff happening, including some very cool stuff this weekend. The first episode of the DF Retro Super Show is finally releasing to everyone. It's about the launch of the PlayStation 2. It's almost 3 hours long. There's a lot in there. I hope you all enjoy it. And in addition, I think we're also going to have a new episode of DF Retro Hit as well. Wow, so it's a retro weekend.
So that's all happened by the time this this video goes live. Fingers crossed.
That's a good point. If you're a patron, maybe it's still the future. But if this is Monday, then yes, go check it out. It's already out.
Also joining me, Oliver McKenzie. Hello.
Yes, Rich. Little worse for wear this week, but it's a packed episode and a 33% larger than usual panel host thing going on. So it's good.
Good stuff. And a bonus presenter. Hello, Tom Morgan. You're here just to talk about our lead news story, but hello regardless.
Yeah, just a cameo. And also, yes, Rich. Join you from a slightly overcast Brighton here, but yeah, happy to be here.
Okay, good stuff. Well, with all of that out of the way, it's just time for me to say, of course, Digital Foundry is now fully independent, so please do consider supporting us at patreon.com/Digital Foundry. If you wish to purchase some apparel with our logos on it, store.digitalfoundry.net. It's the way forward. But with that, let's move on to our first news story. The Black Friday discount season is upon us, with MSI bringing some of its biggest savings ever. Get up to 45% off MSI displays, including their critically acclaimed QD OLEDs like the MPG 272URX and the MPG 321URXW, and get a free Borderlands game code when you buy from selected partners. And there's more. Grab up to £100 in Steam codes with select RTX 50 series graphics cards and up to £70 off MSI motherboards, cases and coolers while stocks last. Click the link in the video description below for more details. So when it was released, Metal Gear Solid Delta looked great, but seemed to have some somewhat awkward performance issues. But a new patch has arrived, which seemingly says that we're going to be seeing some improvements, specifically on PlayStation 5 Professional. And of course, there's some enhancements made elsewhere on the PC version too. We're going to talk about all of that. But Tom, do you want to kick off by talking about what patch 1.21 does for the console? Specifically, what has been promised and what has been delivered?
Right, so the promise was to address the PS5 Pro issues. I think it's performance mainly, and adding a new graphics toggle, which Konami has delivered on. It really is like one of the biggest sticking points of the game at launch when it arrived in August. It was just the headline really was PS5 Pro performing worse than the base PS5.
Right. Okay.
And you know, it's a terrible position to be in, having spent that much on that hardware. And there was just one mode, default mode, with which ran with PSSR. So this patch, delivered by Konami or Virtuous, depending on who handled it, goes some way to fix some of those problems. And yeah, I'm happy to report it is a positive outcome overall. And there's some residual benefits for base PS5, which I'll touch on in a moment. So I guess to get to the point, it is, well, I put together a three-way kind of comparison with 1.11, 1.1.1 on the older default mode on Pro, and then you've got on the middle end right here the 1.2.1 and 1.2.1 performance and quality modes, the new one being the performance mode. So in a nutshell, the quality mode is pretty much a match in settings and resolution for what we had previously. The performance mode is the new thing. It's the one that kind of adjusts the settings to try and squeeze a bit more, even more performance back. But as you can probably see, it's an improvement even on the quality mode. And it seems like some optimizations have been taken under the hood. It seems like there's just an improvement by about 4, 5, 6 FPS on average across the board here, doing these runs across the swamp areas, the earlier virtuous mission of the game. And so as far as non-combat scenarios go, no AI interactions, just walking forward across these areas in a matched like-for-like manner, it's looking really good. I think we've got something to say, John and I, about what happens later when you actually engage. But it's a good outlook. The performance mode is better than the old patch by about 10 FPS. So it's a huge boost, and it gets us to that 60 FPS line through a lot of these areas pretty much without fault, and even goes up to about plus 15 FPS at some points during there's a really good stress test where you walk straight down this swamp area, completely flooded, and there's lumen reflections everywhere, sentries flying overhead. You get a plus 15 FPS boost in that case. So it's a really good turnout. Before, I think we said, all right, you'll need a VR display to really, create perceptually smooth motion from the frames being delivered by this game on PS5 Pro. Now you're getting to the point where, while walking anywhere, you're not going to so much need that as a crutch. I suppose visual settings side, it's worth noting that there is still PSSR engaged on both modes. They haven't dropped it, which means you get the same pros and cons we pointed out in our original review. So in static moments, you're going to have a slightly less clear image than the TAAU method used on the base PS5. But in motion, PSSR resolves all these details, the foliage, the swaying grass, everything with more clarity. So yeah, I think overall I'd take that. I think that's a good turnout for PS5 Pro as well in terms of image clarity.
Right.
And yeah, the only last thing to mention is in terms of how they've achieved this performance boost on the performance mode is they have dropped the ambient occlusion setting, so there will be less abundant shading underneath tall grass. I think it's most best noticed if you switch the entire screen between quality and performance modes on Pro. And the other thing is the Lumen GI setting. Yeah, there's less balanced lighting as a result across Snake's back and geometry across the scene and small grass, which means that those areas are less, they're kind of less, there's less brightness to them because there's no balanced lighting to them from other objects. So it's you'll notice there's some areas that appear darker, some areas appear lighter, but overall it's a less sort of vibrant image on the performance mode. But yes, that's kind of how the three ways stack up, but it's definitely not the entire story. There's issues elsewhere.
Such as?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I can get into it.
Do you want to get into it, John? Yeah, I've been talking for a while.
So the main issue here is that it's still not stable. There is a very easy fix for them to do, which I'll say in a moment here. But essentially, as soon as AI activates, the performance impact becomes known. And this clearly seems to be a CPU limitation. So let's say you're sneaking around in the base area, there's enemies all over the place, you're stealth taking them down. It's no problem. It actually does mostly hold 60 FPS. But as soon as you're caught and the enemies become alert, they begin to walk around the level searching for you, trying to engage the player. Instantly, the frame rate just tanks. It's down into the 40s again. It's not good. And frankly, I think that's not good enough. And it's especially baffling given that the actual game logic and AI and behavior is all directly derived from the PlayStation 2 version. So, yeah. I mean, it was pretty awesome for PS2 era, and it still holds up well. It's just, however they're doing this in the background, it's too heavy for this game on this console. So that's not great. So the solution, as I see it, is one that I'm surprised they just haven't embraced. The 120 hertz output mode on PS5. This wouldn't fix it for everyone, but engaging that, doing VRR properly, which should not be a difficult thing, if they do this, anybody with a VR capable TV will have a much more fluid experience, because as it is right now, it still drops out of the 60 hertz VRR window, which is below 48. So you're constantly getting this ping pong effect between fluid visuals and a sort of stuttery, juddery look. And that sucks. So that's still not very good. So again, if the Konami developers happen to listen to this, that's what you do. You use a 120 hertz output mode, optionally even. Maybe when you enable performance mode or something, it triggers, but it should be there all the time. Even on base system, that will solve this issue. Secondly, I still think they should offer a 30 FPS cap if people are okay with 30 FPS, because you could get consistency. And they do that on the base PS5, but you don't get it here. But on base PS5, the frame rate cap was broken. It had poor frame pacing. So it would be nice to have that implemented but not be broken. But it's nice to want things. You just can't always get them. So that's kind of the state of it right now, where I do think it's a lot better. It's far more playable now. And it's almost a game now where it encourages Snake to be as stealthy as possible in order to keep the frame rate high.
That's not
right.
optimal, though. That's not an optimal outcome, is it?
No, it's not optimal at all. And also the cutscenes still run uncapped. And they're often not 60.
Right.
So the whole thing just feels kind of not great to me. And I still have issues with like jiving with what they're trying to do here, where you've got this fresh coat of paint that looks very modern, but it animates, plays, and behaves like the PS2 game. And I think they could have done a much better job overall with like upping the way things work. I mean, it does have the crouch walking and third person shooting from the 3DS game, but it's a weird one. It feels strange. I never got on with it that well. But Tom, I don't think you've had a chance to play with this much, but I actually have the game on PC as well.
Yes.
And they finally added an official 21:9 mode. And it does work, but I have to say, I think it's inferior to the fan-made 21:9 mode. And the reason is simple. The fan patch allows you to view the cutscenes in 21:9. This one does not. So menus, cutscenes are all limited to 16:9, and then gameplay is ultra wide. I know why they did this, because the original vision, the original scenes are designed to be 16:9. They can't account for things that happen outside that range. And it's true, there are very select sequences I've seen where, the 21:9 view of the cutscene can reveal something that looks weird. But frankly, I think it should be an option. We've seen this in games before. I think Dragon Age the Veilguard had this, where you could toggle a 21:9 or ultra wide cutscene option. It warned you that, hey, you might see some weirdness, but you could do it. I think that should have been the case here.
Right.
But still, it's nice to have official 21:9 gameplay. The bigger issue, though, is that the frame rate still seems to be capped, and there are ways to uncap it, but it causes bugs in the gameplay that break it. So instead, the best way to play it on PC is, in my opinion, to use NVIDIA Smooth Motion. You know what I mean?
Yep. The driver level frame generation solution.
It's not bad. It actually does feel convincing enough, and it looks better than just running at 60 hertz. So I actually did play through the game that way initially. So PC with the smooth motion with the ultra wide patch. So if you just buy this game on Steam and load it up, you're going to have a better experience now than you did at launch, but it's still not as good as it could be. And there is no version of this game that I would say is technically faultless.
Right.
Which is a bummer.
It is a shame.
Tom, you also decided to go back and look at the base PlayStation 5, although I understand that the notes don't actually specify any improvements for the base PlayStation 5. But
I should mention a few quick points on PS5 Pro as well before we get to that. Obviously, the cutscenes on that, they're exactly the same as they were in terms of performance. So you're literally unlocked to 60 and the reading is exactly as it was on quality and performance mode. So it makes there's literally no settings change there. And so it's only in gameplay that any of these changes happen. And as John mentioned, obviously the Pro still drops massively to, mid-30s at points I've had during this one Razvet fight with loads of enemies and there's exploding barrels. And I noticed on the performance mode, it drops to a low of 720p, which is like a new lower DRS bounds there, as opposed to 756p on the quality mode, which was how it was before on the default mode before the patch. So, and they've fixed a few things as well. Like on the plus side, they've fixed the awkward Lumines Arise flickering across the floors of some interiors. Like there's a sort of lab area later on. That seems to be fixed on Pro. But annoyingly, on base PS5, it's still there. And anytime you move the camera, you just get this odd shimmer across the floor, which just doesn't look right. And yeah, 30 FPS cap, unevenly frame paced, which is just no good, really, on the base PS5. So, but yeah, base PS5 on the performance mode, that is improved by about 3 frames per second. It is genuinely like better across the board, but it's also not really as substantial as PS5 Pro. It's still, quite a meager improvement, but it is there. So, yeah, something to celebrate.
Oliver, what do you reckon about all of this?
I don't know. I mean, it's good that they're improving things, but it just seems so kind of fundamentally a little bit miserable, to be honest. Have a 21-year-old game. Like, I don't know. Bluepoint did a great job with it, I thought, back in the day, back in like 2009, 2010. Just getting it running at 60 FPS on 7th gen consoles, and that version runs a heck of a lot better than this version on much more powerful 9th generation console hardware, including the PS5 Pro, the vaunted PS5 Pro. I also don't think it's that amazing looking for a UE5 game, like relative to other UE5 titles we've seen recently. I think there's some better looking ones. Obviously, a lot of that comes down to the animation. I also think the lighting in some areas is a little bit flat looking for a UE5 title relative to some of their games. The fact that it's this heavy for a game that looks like this, that's a remake that really should be like the apex of the form for a game like this. It's a remake, putting a ton of time into it, putting a ton of money into it. Couldn't it have been better? Couldn't they have made better decisions during development? I'm not even saying UE5 is the problem here, because clearly there are performant and good-looking UE5 games in the consoles. There are 60 FPS UE5 games in the consoles that look good, look better than this even. So I just think it's kind of a problematic project. I'd also say similar things probably about the Oblivion remaster earlier this year. The
Virtuous.
Yes, I was about to say Virtuous is a common element. I'm not sure exactly who to maybe put a little bit of blame on here there, but certainly Virtuous is a common element there. And again, in that case, I think John, you had the exact same recommendation, which is like run this at a lower frame rate, use frame gen, kind of cope with it, and maybe that's an okay experience. That game had maybe more profound issues than Metal Gear Solid in terms of its kind of cell loading behavior. Yeah. That was pretty nasty. But it's still a kind of similar situation where you have a game that is an older game, 19 years old, 20, 21 years old, these older titles that people have a lot of nostalgia for. I certainly have a lot of nostalgia for both those games, but you're releasing them in 2025 and they run worse in some respects than they ran back then. I just kind of think that's not a good situation to be in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually just going back, taking a look at some legacy clips of the Bluepoint port to Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. Unfortunately, we don't have combat footage there, but it is slightly disappointing that, at best it's, well, I don't think Metal Gear 3 ever went down to 35 frames per second on the Xbox 360 during combat.
No.
Yeah, I'm just curious what is actually the cause there. I mean, where do you point the finger there? Unreal Engine 5 CPU overhead on top of the original game code overhead? Even then, it seems implausible. What do you reckon, John?
I think it probably is just however they've built this system to allow the original game code to run on top of or beneath Unreal Engine.
Right.
They're essentially taking a page from what Bluepoint always does, right? But clearly they're just not able to do it at the same level. Like, obviously this stuff, you can't always just power your way through a problem. And I would say somewhere along the line, they're doing things that are simply suboptimal, shall we say. And as a result, we're getting performance like this. And that is a shame. Like, I think by reducing the settings and the resolution, they've essentially solved all of the GPU related issues on PS5 Pro. So everything we're seeing now is due to other issues with the way that they've designed this.
Right. Okay.
And I'm not sure they can easily solve that at this point. It does seem to be kind of a Virtuous staple. And there's hints that the Halo campaign Evolved is also a virtuous joint. So it seems like they've become the sort of go-to house. They must have sold themselves well to all these companies saying, hey, we can bring back your old games and run the old code underneath and do this new UE5 shell on top. And at least 3 publishers bought into it. And they do an okay job, but they don't do a good enough job, I would say. This is where Bluepoint typically excelled, but now that they're owned by Sony, obviously, they're not going to tackle these big multi-platform projects anymore like they used to.
Right.
Which is a shame. And there's nobody really to replace them in this area.
Yeah. I guess the sort of regret that I have is that the actual remastering work is generally very good.
Yeah, I'd agree.
It is. But I would honestly argue, I loaded up the original on PS2 running on a CRT, and I think it just still feels better there because like all the graphics and gameplay, it all feels more coherent.
Yeah.
Where this has that weird thing where the graphics just don't match the game.
Yes. Yeah.
Like it just feels strange.
This is a problem that Oblivion Remastered has as well, is that disconnect, right? Between the huge stutters between the segmented world and the beautiful visuals. I think they're beautiful anyway. It just doesn't quite match up.
And that is always the trouble. I mean, when you look at something like the Demon Souls remake or Shadow of the Colossus, those games in their original form had better like animation work that felt more natural and still holds up better today. So like even if it's running that original sort of design beneath the surface, it still feels contemporary. This doesn't feel that contemporary, especially if you've played a lot of The Phantom Pain, which is like so dramatically better, which ultimately, Rich, this comes back to those old Fox engine cutscenes that we saw for MGS 3 that we never really got. And it's like, all we really wanted was a remake of this using the Fox engine, but taking advantage of what its gameplay systems and everything were offered. You know, like if they had done a Phantom Pain style gameplay design, but remaking Metal Gear Solid 3, I think that would have been absolutely stellar.
Right.
And unfortunately, will now never happen.
So just to be clear, you're referring to the cinematics that are in the pachinko machine in Japan.
Yes, exactly. There's pachinko machine cutscenes that seemingly were rendered with the Fox engine, suggesting that they went through a bunch of work to get all this stuff running in that engine. I mean, that's nowhere near a complete game, but man, we could dream. That would have been cool.
Okay. Well, I think that's all we've got to say about this. I mean, I guess work is ongoing. You'd expect to see further improvements, but when it comes to sort of CPU optimizations, that's going to be very, very tricky.
Do we think it's going to ever be improved or fixed? Is there any optimism there?
Not completely.
Do we need to wait for a PS6 is the question.
I mean, you wait for the PC. You just play it on PC.
True. You wait for the PC. You wait until you could afford an expensive PC.
Yeah, exactly. Until you can afford an expensive PC. But I wanted to also mention, while we're on Konami, Silent Hill F. Right. That has also not been touched. And I've been wanting to play through this. And frankly, the PS5 Pro version is not good enough. And it's driving me nuts. Like I had to, like that's not right. The PSSR implementation is terrible in that game. There's so much noise and destruction to the image that they need to patch in a toggle to disable that or fix the PSSR problem, because right now it's bad on PS5 Pro. And I can't play the game because I don't want to have to go fetch the original PS5 that's downstairs in the living room, bring it up just to play this game, right? That's a hassle. We shouldn't have to do that. And most people aren't going to have both anyway. So come on, Konami, fix this stuff.
Okay, fair enough. Well, Tom, thanks for that. We'll bid you farewell now, and I guess we're going to move on to our next news topic.
Yes, Tom.
See you guys.
So this is a game that certain team members have been really looking forward to. Vampire, the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 came out recently. We've got hold of some review code. I'm not sure we're going to have the bandwidth to actually accommodate a full review, but Oliver, you have taken a look at it, right?
Yeah. I have.
Right.
Oliver.
Okay.
That doesn't sound good.
So I have pretty mixed feelings about this for some reasons that will become clear, I think. But just on the visual front, it's UE5. And it looks like it's Lumen Nanite VSM the classics, all the classics.
Right.
So I think there are some
Greatest hits.
Yeah. So like the lighting looks pretty good in a lot of scenarios, I think. In scenarios where other games maybe don't look so good, like in this hallway here, there's this enemy flashlight and he's lighting up the hallway with this indirect bounce light, and there's a bit of a lag to it, but it looks pretty cool. You know, we see that in some UE5 titles like Chronos, that kind of nice bounce light there. There's lumen reflections here as well, though interestingly, they're mirror sharp quite often, which is probably not a best practice for lumen reflections, especially considering this game uses software lumen. So they look very blobby and indistinct, and they don't really match the scene. Like the kind of
Mr. Blobby.
Yeah, they don't really match it so well. So like oftentimes in UE5 games, you might see like a mirror, but the surface of the mirror will be very pockmarked and gritty, and you'll only get this kind of like very rough reflection of the scene. And that's not the case here. You see a lot of very mirror sharp reflections. But it does have a lot of visual weaknesses as well. Like dialogue scenes are something that really landed with me, that really stuck with me in a negative way. They're very basic. They have very minimal animation beyond the face. Now, if you go back to Bloodlines 1, I'm not going to say the lip sync was like the best in the world. Obviously, that was like a 2004 game. They were working with the early versions of the source engine. It was not the best environment for creating expressive actors. But they did have interesting scene compositions, and they did have interesting body poses, and they were doing all kinds of interesting things. In this game, it really is just like you have a little bit of lip movement and not so much expression in the body, not so much excitement there. It looks kind of very just disappointing and a little bit sedate, I would say. And yeah, the production values, I think in those sequences, you really do feel like the game is not being produced to a very high level of quality necessarily in those sequences. The other issue visually with this game, like it looks fine. It looks decent enough for a UE5 title. I'm not expecting the world here. Obviously, this game has had a very tumultuous development history. It was developed by Hardsuit Labs, I think it was, a company a number of years ago. Development was switched over to the Chinese room, I think, in 2022. It was switched from a cross-generation title that used UE4 to a current generation only title that used UE5, so I'm not expecting miracles in terms of the graphics, and they generally look fine, at least from my limited playthrough. Performance is pretty bad, though. Now, the interiors are basically fine, but you get out into the exterior, into the kind of the game's open world, which seems kind of like a fairly limited open world without a ton of stuff to do in it. But
it's like the original, right?
Yeah, the original had like pretty nice side quests and stuff, though it had some stuff to do. This seems a little bit more empty to me, but again, this is just provisionally based off a little bit of gameplay. But it's like really struggling to hold a stable 60 FPS. I'm playing on PlayStation 5 here in performance mode, and it's kind of like in the 40s, 50s. It's stuttering. It's just a really messy and uneven experience. Maybe if this game was shipping in 2021 or 2022, you excuse it because it's UE5, it's an open world-ish kind of title, but we've seen titles like Mafia recently deliver a mostly locked 60 FPS in an open world environment. We've seen titles like The Outer Worlds 2 deliver a mostly locked 60 FPS, at least on Xbox, in a pretty much open world environment in a very large set of environments there. So that's quite disappointing. And then just as a general matter, like as a game, it doesn't really feel anything like Bloodlines to me. The first problem comes right on boot. You have two options to start the game. You can pick a male or a female character with predefined facial structure, and that's it. No choice of clans, no skill points, no nothing. A lot of this game centers on a personality in your head called Fabian, who's like the second protagonist. You have no control over who they are, how they behave, their role in the story, just nothing. And that's important because in the first game, your choice of clan, Bruja, Tremere, Nosferatu, whatever, greatly affected your appearance. If you were Nosferatu, famously, you had to traverse the game mostly using the sewers because the non-vampire people would be terrified of you, terrified of your appearance. If you were Malkavian, huge parts of the game were rewritten because you were kind of insane. You were losing your mind as the game went on. And the more combat-focused specialties like Bruja or Tremere had blood magic or really strong hand-to-hand combat, really strong fist combat abilities that played a significant role in gameplay as well. Here you have very minimal control over that kind of backstory. You awake as an elder vampire. You do have control over your clan. You are able to pick a clan later in the game, but it seems to just affect a couple of combat abilities on timers. It's just nothing like the original. The action itself is very focused on melee combat. You have very limited abilities. Doesn't feel very good. Doesn't feel very much like Bloodlines 1. Now, Bloodlines 1 was janky in its own ways, so perhaps the combat there is not an exemplar of the genre, but
yeah.
you know, it was very different than this game. And in general, you don't have very much flexibility in tackling objectives that I could see. It's a very linear kind of action game. So, as someone who played Bloodlines 1 a lot when I was like, 10 years old on my PC, on my first gaming PC, having a huge blast with it, even though it was like totally terrifying to me at the time, like the kind of Santa Monica manor and stuff. That was really
the manor, yeah,
really
man,
frightening, really frightening.
It was awesome.
I just think this deserved better. I'm really disappointed. Like, I don't think they need to make some massive open world RPG, but like something like a Deus Ex Human Revolution or Bloodlines 1 in scope, maybe a bit bigger with, maybe more polish put into it. Troika was famously very heavily burdened towards the end of the game's development. It shipped with a ton of bugs. There's obviously a very long-running unofficial fan patch to address a lot of the game's problems and restore a lot of unreleased content, unfinished content in the game that's kind of necessary to play the game in this day and age with any reasonable degree of quality. But yeah, just super disappointing to me. Like, I'm open to developers changing genre. I'm open to developers changing scope. But it feels like that original game was so iconic and it was so important to me personally that to see them come back with a game called Bloodlines 2 and it's basically just an action game, not a very good action game, with these performance problems, not really fulfilling the spirit or the scope of that original game in any meaningful way. It's just super disappointing to me. So I'm just really cold on this one.
Right. Okay.
Wow.
John.
Yeah, I haven't played it yet because I've heard some impressions and hearing from Oliver there. I'm also a huge fan of it. It was the first non-Valve Source Engine game. And it shipped just around the time of Half-Life 2, actually.
I think it was the very first Source Engine game because it shipped right before Half-Life 2. Actually.
Yeah. Well, I think there was like Half-Life Source.
Or
maybe
true,
or CS Source or something was out. But either way, it was like the first original game on Source Engine then. That's cool. And yeah, I have very distinct memories of it. And this comes from, I was a big fan of immersive sims, of course, at the time. This was, just a few years after Deus Ex 1, System Shock 2, the Thief series, those types of games. I love those types of games. And Bloodlines ended up being one of those. The original take on Vampire the Masquerade, which was Redemption, was a very more traditional CRPG, but Bloodlines truly was like an amazing, very open-ended, immersive sim style game. And that seems to be what they were trying to make originally with this sequel before they switched developers. All those demos shown, from what I understand, that was the goal, was to essentially do for this series what was done for, I guess, Eidos Montreal did for Deus Ex with Human Revolution. But it sounds like the version that was being made there was just a bunch of vertical slices. They didn't really have a way to get it finished, get it put together properly, and it was just a mess apparently. No direct confirmation, just hearsay. But it when you hear those things, it starts to make sense why they would have changed developer. It's just a shame that the Chinese room is the one that was selected, because, not to knock what they've done great stuff, but they're not really well suited to that sort of game. And it seems like that's what they did not make. They made something else entirely that's not really true to what that was about, which makes you wonder then, like, why even bring back the name at that point, right? Like, the whole project just seems like a big failure from top to bottom. And looking at your footage here, like, even if you're on board with it, it seems to run horribly on the consoles. Like, it just does not look smooth at all.
Yeah, I mean, Alex isn't here this week, but those do look like some tremendous traversal stutters on that footage you've got there, Oliver.
Yeah, it's... I mean, I would need to expand the frame time graph to see, and perhaps I will do that for the footage that we published here, but there are some big stutters. Looks like well over 100 milliseconds in the mix, plus just generally poor performance. Not very good.
Okay.
Bummer.
That is a bummer, but with that in mind, let's move on. Right, so we missed out on covering this when it first appeared, but it is certainly noteworthy. Assassin's Creed Shadows is getting a port to Nintendo Switch 2. There has been a trailer released, amusingly released at 720p resolution on the official Nintendo channel. However, Ubisoft does have a 1080p version, so we're taking a look at that. It's an ambitious enterprise. What do you think about it, Oliver? I guess to cut to the chase, Tagon86, the supporter, asks, do you see any signs of RT in the released media for Assassin's Creed Shadows on Switch 2?
No, I do not. In
Yeah, fair
AC Shadows, the main areas where the non-RT lighting really falls apart, in my opinion, are in naturalistic areas between towns and settlements where the probe density is probably pretty low. And the lighting has a bit of a flatter quality to it with like less pleasing gradients between light and dark. Foliage doesn't have a very grounded appearance, and the sky color tends to predominate in shadowed regions. You get that kind of bluish cast very often. And a few of the shots in the snow and in forested areas in this trailer give me a bit of that impression of the baked lighting in this game. Now, I would want to see more detailed comparisons or ideally be able to do some comparisons on my own with the actual product here to say that conclusively, but at least my impression so far from the released media has been that it's probably that baked GI and not the RTGI that we saw on the PS5 and Series X in their 40 FPS and 30 FPS modes, and PS5 Pro in its 60 FPS modes in all of its modes. On Series S, notably Series S, even though it only ran at 30 FPS, it did not have RTGI in any mode, so perhaps similar limitations would come into play with the Switch 2 here, especially considering that, you do have that portable mode with its massively cut back clock rate. That probably is not too suitable, I would imagine, for such a mode. But one thing I did want to highlight here is that Ubisoft is being super tricky with their assets again as well. Like you mentioned, they had that 720p asset, but even the 1080p asset, and just at 30 FPS, it doesn't really speak to a whole lot of confidence in this game. And I feel a little bit more confident in mentioning it this time around, because we saw them pull like the exact same routine with their assets for Star Wars Outlaws, right? Which did end up shipping in a very good state. I have no doubts that this game will ship in a good state as well, but it does seem like, they're just keen to publish lower quality media. With Star Wars Outlaws, they were only publishing like stream rips, or other people were publishing stream rips in the Ubisoft Connect event.
Yeah.
And I just feel like if you're going to show content on YouTube from Switch 2, just upload it at 4K 60, so we can get a better impression of all the details. That's certainly been the practice from multiple publishers so far. That's been the way that people have gone. I think it's the most honest way to show off your game, and probably the way that makes your game look the most flattering here, because I don't think even a game that's low resolution looks very good when it's slathered with compression artifacts.
Yeah.
So that's my own personal suggestion here in terms of how to present these titles in the most flattering way.
Yeah, just to sort of put that into context, I mean, first of all, the higher the resolution asset you give to YouTube, basically the better it looks, because higher bit rates, higher resolution, get higher bit rate. It just generally translates into a better image on the target device. The concept of running what is probably a 30 FPS game in a 60 FPS container on YouTube may not make sense, but it actually preserves the entire output of the source console. And basically, if there are performance drops, they look much worse on a 30 FPS YouTube video than a 60 FPS YouTube video. So in terms of sort of best practices for assets on YouTube, it doesn't really matter what your source resolution is or what the source frame rate is. What matters is capturing the entire output of the console and putting it on YouTube at the highest possible resolution, because it just kind of presents better, so to speak. John, any thoughts specifically on Assassin's Creed Shadows? I mean, I'm really looking forward to it. I just think even if it doesn't have the ray trace GI, it's a worthy endeavor.
I would say Star Wars Outlaws sort of set my expectations pretty high here, because, I mean, different team, of course, that's massive, and Snowdrop, but that was such an incredible port. It really brought forward the feeling of Star Wars Outlaws, and they've continued to improve it since. And then, like you said, Oliver, the initial media for it was terrible.
Yeah.
And the result was great. So it's really tough to judge this. So everything we can say from this is just based on just this media and our hope that the final game will see improvements. But the main things I'm seeing here, I do think it looks very good at a glance. I think they're heading in the right direction. As you noted, the lack of ray tracing is certainly clear, especially anything that shows more interior spaces as well. Like you mentioned the outdoors with the open lighting, but like darker regions, like there's some media around of her like in like a darkened corridor at night, like sort of in stealth mode. And the RTGI of the original allowed all like those darker areas to be filled with this natural shadow, and in the Switch 2 version, that's just all gone. Everything's very glowy. the specular sheen is visible across the whole world. It just doesn't look quite right. But again, you know, they had to make cuts. They managed to get RT, GI, and Star Wars Outlaws, but perhaps they're making different choices here. And then I would still say the results are certainly attractive, and I'm excited to see what they do with it, because I do think this was a really excellent game, and one of the best things they've done in a while in this series after some, dare I say, not very good games. I was famously not a fan of Assassin's Creed Valhalla at all. I think this is much better. I also noted visually, it seems like they finally added per object motion blur to this game on the other systems and PC, and then now they've stripped it away, it looks like, or at least based on the assets here, it feels like it's not there, which is a bummer. And then things like shadow quality, the fog quality, things like that all seems to be cut back a little bit. But again, all of this is just preliminary, just looking at what is presumably a very poor quality asset, as we saw before. So I think we're just excited to see what they do with it. And I think Ubisoft's track record so far on Switch 2 is shaping up to be quite good, because these are not simple games to run.
No.
These are high-end current generation console games that they're doing a really great job bringing over to the Switch 2. And I think that definitely deserves to be commended. I do remember there was some rumors about Assassin's Creed Mirage as well showing up, but I gather that with this appearing so soon, that's probably off the table. And Mirage actually would have made sense, I think, given that it even had like an iPhone port and things like that, right? So like that should have been an easy one to do, but going straight for Shadows, that's like amping up the challenge level right there. And they went for it. So I can't wait to see how it turns out.
I mean, it is only a 30 FPS YouTube video, but I've been diligently tapping away on a frame by frame basis, and I haven't seen any repeat frames. So it does look as though performance, based on the very, very limited sample we have, certainly looks initially promising, I'd say. So, yeah, interested to see what the final game looks like. I think from a presentational perspective, there's a lot of shots here showing the ground, and the ground textures don't particularly appeal. But beyond that, I think there's a lot to get excited about here. So, looking forward to seeing the final game. I believe it's out in December the 2nd, the trailer says.
I'm sure we'll cover that, but I want to be covering Metroid Prime 4 at the time, so hopefully.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant stuff. Let's move on. Okay, so a while back on Sony's State of Play, Lumines Arise was announced, and it looks absolutely fantastic. And John, you've actually had access now to a preview build of the game, and I'm going to suggest that it's probably still absolutely fantastic.
Yes, Rich, it really is. So obviously these guys are known for taking simple concepts, puzzle games, and injecting music and style into them. And the original Lumines, which was a launch game for the PSP in Japan, was sort of like the big breakout for this. Like, obviously, a lot of these guys, when they still worked at Sega, like Mizuguchi-san, they did Rez, right? But Rez is more of an action flying rail shooter style game. Lumines is really, and of course Meteos and the DS is where they started heading this direction of taking puzzle games, simple concepts, and adapting them with style. Tetris Effect then came out some years ago, and that was like a big evolution of that, which combined the classic Tetris with like music and visuals, and it was glorious. And now, even though Lumines was always kind of that, they've taken it a step further, very much going into the Tetris Effect style. And so I've been playing, or I had access to the preview build on PC of Lumines Arise. It doesn't have the VR stuff in it yet or anything like that, which it will support. But I wanted to comment on it because it's just such a magical, visually beautiful experience. I really thought it was just going to be an extension of the already gorgeous Tetris Effect, but they've really gone nuts with just like the different play fields. So like for those that don't know, Lumines is a game where, so like in Tetris, you clear blocks by dropping them and matching them and then creating like, squared or lines, right? You have to complete the line and then it deletes. With Lumines, there's a bar that moves across the screen, and as the bar moves, it tags any shapes that match that are in a block formation, and they sort of glow. And then when the bar hits the end, they they disappear, and then the blocks fall from there. So it's all about using one of two types of blocks. There's basically like there's like a yin and yang of every block, right? Like imagine you have a white block and a black block. You match the black blocks, they disappear, then the remaining white blocks fall until you get them in the right pattern. And the idea is that line sweeping across goes with the tempo of the music. And all the visualizations and everything as they delete also sort of plays into the music. So it's all very driven by the soundscape. But of course, the visuals as well. And this is where they've really ramped it up, where it's just so much more going on in the backgrounds, the detail of the backgrounds, the weirdness of the shapes. It's just awesome. It's so beautiful, so fluid. And it's something that I just wanted to make sure to highlight here because it's worth keeping an eye on. Because these guys, man, like it really is just sublime. Lumines is, for my money, possibly, I mean, Tetris is the OG, but Lumines was kind of like, I would say, my favorite puzzle game, especially just that original PSP experience. I mean, you guys have played Lumines on PSP, I assume, right?
Oh, many, many years ago, John.
Yeah. I mean, but it was amazing.
Absolutely,
it was magical.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it was the first time we had something like this. And I just love that they've continued to refine this idea over the past 20 years. And this feels like them coming full circle back to where this journey really started and just doing it at the highest possible level. So, I'm very eager to play the final game and especially check out the VR support. Because even though it's still like a flat game, like I assume it's going to be similar to Tetris Effect, where you're surrounded by the effects and the visuals happening around you, and then the playfield sort of floating out in the middle of space before your eyes. And it just creates a really nice immersion because your eyeballs are focused on the puzzle, but your peripheral vision picks up the stuff happening around you, which actually makes it feel more immersive and sort of like eliminates any of the VR drawbacks typically. So it's a weird thing with focus where a game within a game in a VR space really tends to do that. So I can't wait to try it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, keep an eye out.
Yeah, I think generally if you've got basically a game that is completely taking you out of your real world environment and creating a new environment within which to play the game, there's much to commend that if they do it right. And these guys are just the masters of it, especially when you've got that soundscape going on as well. It's just phenomenal. Do you have anything to add, Oliver?
Not too much here. I played the Tetris Effect, I think the demo on PSVR, and I found that quite nice, quite a good experience. So I imagine this in the VR is quite a show-stopping game. But I guess we'll have to wait and see exactly how that looks.
I'm wondering if they'll bring this to MetaQuest. Currently, they say it's not confirmed, but they did bring Tetris Effect. They brought like Res, Infinite, and other things to the native Quest platform as well. Currently, though, I assume you can just use your Quest with wireless play to play the PC version, but still.
Yeah.
I would love a native version as well.
Yeah.
This does still seem to be Unreal Engine. I assume it's just Unreal Engine 5, but I can't imagine it's actually taking advantage of any of the UE5 specific features because it just doesn't make sense. Like there's no reason to do that for a game like this. Mm-hmm. So, but it is heavy on the particles and the lighting, that's for sure.
Absolutely. Okay, we'll look forward to that. Let's move on. Okay, so it seems that a week can't pass without some new type of Microsoft controversy. This week, Satya Nadella gave an interview where, basically there's a lot of comments about how Xbox isn't actually competing with other consoles, actually competing with TikTok. I think that's been slightly taken out of context, but there's also some intriguing comments here about the nature of the next generation console. There's been reporting from Windows Central, which basically sort of was trying to put together everything we know about the next generation consoles, which is to say it's a hybrid PC that runs other stores. I'm not sure the extent to which that is news. I feel like we've been talking about that for a very, very long time now. But again, there were some comments from Nadella about that as well. Comments that I don't fully understand. But Oliver, maybe you could clue me in.
Yeah, it's a little bit confusing here because he's talking about how console is an unparalleled experience, and then he's talking about, we're looking forward to the next console, the next PC gaming, which is not quite grammatical and doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I think that, you know, Satya is kind of not so subtly hinting at the future direction of Xbox and the fact that it is going to be a Windows business based computer, because as he says here, the biggest gaming business is the Windows business. Now, I find that kind of funny because, like, he is saying that, and I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think that Windows is like a huge business. Obviously, it's a huge business in gaming. But as Satya himself admits, Microsoft is not the publisher, the key platform holder in PC gaming at the moment. That's Steam. Steam is the key publisher in PC gaming.
Yeah, fair point. Yeah.
Key platform holder, I should say, in PC gaming. So that makes them kind of an imperfect driver and an imperfect beholder of the success in that industry, if the industry moves towards more of a PC first focus, especially with the next generation Xbox. And especially if, as has been reported innumerable times, you'll be able to install Steam on the next generation Xbox just as easily as you can on the ROG Ally device. And I have to say, on the ROG Ally devices, it's very, very easy to install Steam. Set that as the default and never ever look at the Xbox experience again necessarily. You don't need to look at that too much. That's certainly a development that I think undercuts their stake in the PC platform potentially. But yeah, I think there is probably something to this notion that short form video is competing with gaming, just in the sense that it's competing for time, and time is that kind of exhaustible resource that everyone is trying to pursue, is trying to chase here. But I do kind of wonder, like, what the future of gaming looks like if you're looking at TikTok as a main competitor, because TikTok is really scratching an itch with that short form content. I quite enjoy TikTok, I must admit, but it really does satisfy a certain kind of dopamine rush. It gives you that really short form instant gratification. The algorithm has a very good idea of what your preferences are, what you want to see. And so I kind of think, like, if you're looking at new interactive experiences, as Satya is talking about here, they might be able to compete with that. It probably looks more like something like a TikTok with kind of interactive gaming experiences that you swipe through or something like this, than it looks like a AAA, $60 title. Or maybe it looks a little bit like Fortnite, one of these.
Sounds like WarioWare to me.
Yeah, so WarioWare, exactly. And machine learning, an AI WarioWare or something. Perhaps that's what it looks like. I'm not sure that's a great future for the industry, but I could certainly see something like that having the same addictive potential, because that really is the key to TikTok, that swiping behavior, seeing something new, and then the algorithmic delivery of new content that's tailored to your tastes. So I don't know, maybe that's a bit of a bleak vision, but I could definitely see Satya and a lot of executives in the boardroom trying to plan out for that vision. And even in that case, I don't think Microsoft is necessarily well positioned, because Microsoft does not do social media applications. They do some of the backend stuff. They're working on some of the technologies that power kind of machine learning technologies that could power a gaming experience that is enabled by machine learning technologies. But they're not necessarily in the driver's seat for that kind of innovation either. So I'm not totally sure where Satya sees their business. I think they're well positioned to be a massive publisher in AAA. They're well positioned to deliver Call of Duty across many platforms, but they're maybe not as well positioned to be like a huge platform holder in the era of PC gaming, or potentially trying to seize some like social media zeitgeist gaming app or something that might emerge in the future. I'm not sure they're necessarily too well positioned.
I think it's worth pointing out that this stuff about TikTok actually came from Xbox's Matt Booty last week, I believe. The headline here from Video Games Chronicle: Xbox's biggest competition isn't another console, but TikTok and movies, claims exec. I mean, there's nothing really new here. Gaming's competition is competition with whatever it is that occupies people's free time. And it can be like TV, movies, doom scrolling on your phone, whatever. But, gaming is quite different. It's a different kind of pursuit there. So, with all of this discussion about TikTok, John, I just hope you've got a bucket ready for you to throw up into. but what do you make of these comments?
The TikTok comment was extremely revealing to me. Like you say, this is nothing new. We know that they're competing for your time, but this really puts into sharp focus how much somebody like Matt Booty views their games business is. They are they're competing for your engagement. That's what they want. And while that is technically true, if you think about the games industry as a whole over the years, you can't imagine somebody like back in the day, creating some of the masterpieces that we beloved. Like when Metal Gear Solid was created, we'll say, you know, do you think that the marketing execs were thinking like we need to compete with films because we're trying to compete with time? It was more about we need to make a product that will sell X number of units in order to fund making other cool things.
Yeah.
And they were employing creatives to create these cool things, and people liked cool things, hence why you would employ those creatives, right? It was a simple thing based on like, make a cool thing. It's not about how long you play it, it's about that experience of playing it, and what mattered was how much you sold. Well, more like what mattered is how much you made in reflection to how much you spent to make the thing, and balancing that equation was key. And that's what allowed a lot of creatives to just do their thing, and that's what the console industry used to be. But then, of course, the rise of these sort of forever games and just the way things are these days, the internet, it has become a competition for time, so to speak. And it seems that so if these execs are only thinking about that versus like just selling units or just making the money, they're not okay with just making money to recoup costs. They want to make all the money. And I get that from a business perspective, but it just sort of sucks the soul out of what gaming was about, right? And so if your company is being driven by people with this mindset, I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. I would say this is not the mindset within Nintendo. If you look at what Nintendo in Japan is probably thinking, they're not sitting there thinking we need to get X amount of time from our users. We must extract as much time as possible so that they play Switch for this amount of time. That's not what they're making games for, is my guess. And I think this poisonous thinking is precisely what led Sony down that dark path of the forever game, which has failed. I think this is the mindset of Jim Ryan and the investors and everything that was happening within PlayStation that caused them to end up in the situation. Like, yes, they're selling a lot of units, but we know that they're not producing as efficiently as they used to, and a lot of that's down to studios being railroaded by this forever game nonsense and then having the rug pulled out from under them. And all of that stems from this mindset about just investing to get, you're only making the game to get people's time because you want them to stay in that game and just keep spending money, and that's it. That's the goal. And I think that sucks. I really hate that attitude. And I think it's poisonous and bad for games. I don't think there's necessarily something wrong with having games that keeps people going, but it's become so, I don't know, man. I really don't like this attitude. And it's soured me on a lot on the future. But thankfully, we do still have developers, both in the indie and the big, AAA, AA space that clearly just want to make cool games, and they're able to do that, and they're able to make enough money to keep that going. So I'm fighting for them, basically.
Well, can you just imagine like Warner Brothers or latterly Universal going to Christopher Nolan, hey, this Oppenheimer, it's looking really awesome, right? But have you seen TikTok? Have you seen the amount of time people are scrolling through TikTok? It's just like, come on. If you make a quality experience that demands your time, that earns your time, then,
Right.
that's basically it, right?
And I think there's room for both. One thing I would look at is something like the music industry. Like sometimes I enjoy just like putting music on random and listening to all kinds of stuff streamed from all over the place. And that can be fun. But there's also the art of the album where you sit down and listen to an album through, and that experience is very different and I think still very special. And I think if we had completely lost the album, we would be losing something major about what makes music so enjoyable. So my fear would be gaming going so far down this hole of just competing only for your engagement that everything turns into this like mush where it's just like slop, especially with the rise of AI. Everything's about generating things that gets people's eyeballs on it for like 5 seconds. They see it. Yeah. The next 5-second thing, more and more AI, more co-pilot, more generated stuff, just making stuff to just get people to click on it, to make the money. And it's just, it just feels like there's a very bad direction things could go if it continued too far down this path.
Yeah, I do think that the way that Microsoft has set up their gaming business at the moment is more TikTok-like. It is almost to compete with these short-form video content apps because
it's not good.
They're low friction, right? They try to minimize
Yeah.
friction through the use of subscription services, through the use of technologies like the Xbox Cloud, formerly, xCloud, through shipping their games across many, many different devices, every single device all at once. Whereas Nintendo and Sony tend to be making more discrete experiences, less of a focus on streaming, more of a focus on exclusive platforms, maybe are more inclined to give you a smaller number of higher quality experiences than the Microsoft approach, which is to basically buffet you with tons of Game Pass content every week, right, to cycle through. So perhaps in their own mind, in their own positioning, they're thinking of their business as a TikTok-like business or as a business that's designed to compete with TikTok. Whereas I think when Sony is making a game like Ghost of Yotei, they're not really thinking, okay, how does this stack up against the latest viral videos, right? Because that's not necessarily their remit with that service.
I'm just going to read out the Nadella comment here. Most importantly, the game's business model has to be where we have to invent maybe some new interactive media as well, because after all, gaming's competition is not other gaming. Gaming's competition is short-form video. And so if we as an industry don't continue to innovate both how we produce, what we produce, how we think about distribution, the economic model, right? The best way to innovate is to have good margins, because that's the way you can fund. And I'm just thinking about these kind of like, immediate experiences that give you a kind of like TikTok style hit, so to speak. And oddly enough, we've got like a gigantic catalog of them, because old games, originating in the arcades, they were very short experiences designed to hook you immediately. And I was just thinking this week about the Google search logo. You click it and you get a Halloween themed version of Pac-Man. And it's like classic Pac-Man. And it's just, in terms of like that immediate hit, it's kind of as good as it was back in the day. And if it's not modern, well, I direct you to, Geometry Wars, Evolved, games like that, which kind of like the modern successors for those type of immediate experiences that are just equally as brilliant. I think there's room for all different sorts of gaming.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not, and absolutely we have to have innovation, but a lot of the work has already been done. It's just we've kind of transitioned away from it.
Yeah, I mean, I think business-wise, I see exactly where he's coming from, and I think, with a company focused on making money like that, it does make sense. I'm pretty 6'7" on it myself, but, as the proverbial old man that yells at the cloud, I was looking back at
the
footage
xCloud?
Yes, correct. I was looking back at footage of the Halo 3 launch, actually, thinking about classic Xbox, right? And there's just an energy and excitement there that, like, man, I really miss. And I don't think it's really hard to recreate that spectacle today. But just like this, like, almost like communal excitement over the release of that game, everybody was so, like, hyped for it, lining up around buildings, it was just everywhere. It was such a big deal. And it felt really fun to be a part of that. Like, that actually is, that is the kind of thing, the zeitgeist that you also got with really big movies. And I still think that happens with movies, but it's happening less and less with games. And I feel like games have just like kind of lost that, which, maybe that's just, again, that's just where we're heading. That's the future generation. And I'm just nostalgic for old things again, but those days were good.
Before we move on, I just want to tackle these next-gen console comments. I'm going to, again, read the quote because on the face of it, it doesn't make sense, but I think I kind of understand the sentiment. The quote is, "We want to do innovative work on the system side, on the console and on the PC." And it's kind of funny that people think about the console and PC as two different things. We built the console because we wanted to build a better PC, which could then perform for gaming. And so I kind of want to revisit some of that conventional wisdom. But at the end of the day, console has an experience that is unparalleled. It delivers performance that's unparalleled, that pushes, I think, the system forward. So I'm really looking forward to the next console, the next PC gaming. Kind of sounds a bit like a word salad, right? Since we built the console because we wanted to build a better PC, which could then perform for gaming. I don't quite get that. But what I think is happening here, alongside the comments about a curated experience, I honestly think that it is going to be the case that the Xbox as we know it is kind of like going to be on a sort of partition of Windows, so to speak, that's separate and distinct from running the games on Steam and Epic Game Store, whereas at that point it probably defers to being a standard PC or a standard Windows or a version of it. It really does sound as though they're going to have to keep Xbox within its own area on that particular hardware, which I think is easily the right move forward, simply for security concerns, right? You've got to keep the integrity of the ecosystem. I think it's going to have to be separate and distinct from Windows in that respect. It's just you can run standard Windows games. I think that's kind of the only takeaway that I could possibly get from that sort of comment. How you could possibly marry those two worlds together. But I don't know. I guess we're just going to have to, at some point, just stop reading the tea leaves and just let Microsoft actually reveal what it is that they're doing. I guess at this point, we should just move on. So, final news story of the week. We're going to be talking about Routine. It's finally coming out. There has been a release date trailer. But at this point, you probably don't even know what Routine actually is. So, because it's been so long. John, take it away.
My goodness. Routine, I believe, was first shown back in 2012. This is the Wii U PS360 era still. That's when it was shown at Gamescom that year. To say that this development has been routine would be false, to say the least, because it has been a long time in the works. And it was largely forgotten about. And it seems that they rebooted it essentially. And 3 years ago, they actually launched a trailer revealing it. I think it was at Jeff Con 22, where it had this Alien Isolation-esque, very horror-driven sci-fi setting that was just absolutely gorgeous, I thought. I love the aesthetic they were going for. And, looking into the history, I was like, wow, okay, I forgot about this. This had been around for so long. And again, I forgot about it until this new trailer dropped, when it's like, wait a minute, it's actually like they're actually committing to it. It's coming out. And sure enough, it is actually really coming out. So yeah, so they finally announced it's coming out December 4th. So the reason I'm so interested in this is because, similar to Alien Isolation, they go really big on analog style video effects. And the ones in this trailer look freaking outstanding. Like, it really does look like you're viewing it through some kind of like old security monitor CRT that's been run through a VCR, in a way that it's genuinely like in like a proper analog looking image. And that, with the camera movement and just the atmosphere on display, I don't know, it really caught my attention. It's just something that I'm very interested in playing. So I don't know about you guys, but I think this looks phenomenal. And it's cool that a game that was announced so long ago, 13, 14 years ago, I don't know, is when it started, is finally hitting.
Mm-hmm. Well, typically the extended development time doesn't actually tend to favor the game that actually comes out. But it's just snippets that we've got here in this release date trailer, but it certainly looks super, super intriguing. What do you think, Oliver?
Yeah, I'd love to see more of this game, but perhaps that's just part of the PR beat for what is a horror game. You don't want to show off too much. You want to keep players intrigued. I do love the VHS effects. I love those scan lines. I love the distortion. It looks very real. It looks very impressive for a real-time game to be looking like that. It's very cool. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this for sure. I like Alien Isolation quite a bit. But it's just so hard to tell from this trailer exactly what this game will amount to in its specifics, because it is so fragmentary. There are some moments that do remind me a bit of Isolation when you're fighting off those kind of robot humanoids. But who knows exactly what it will look like in the end.
It's getting an Xbox One version, by the way, according to the...
Yeah, this is an Xbox exclusive, one of the rare ones.
Absolutely, yeah. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
That's amazing. Wow. Holy moly. Wow. It's been a long time since that's happened. Like, yeah. I'm going to pull out the Xbox Series X out of storage, and I'm ready, baby. Let's do it.
The
The other one I can think of recently, interestingly enough, was the Warhammer Space Marine 1. Remaster.
yeah.
That was also an Xbox exclusive, Xbox and PC exclusive.
It's kind of ironic it's getting an Xbox One version, but it kind of makes sense if development started in 2012, a full year before the Xbox One came out.
Sure. I mean, if it looks this good, I have no qualms with that.
Absolutely.
It really just shows that it's not just about the tech, it's about the artistic vision.
Mm-hmm.
That's what matters when it comes to presentation.
Okay, brilliant stuff. Well, let's move on. Okay, so this is Supporter Q&A. It's the part of the show where every week I post on Patreon asking our patrons to comment on the topics we're going to be talking about and pose their questions for the team. We've got this question, actually, it's a couple of questions, one from Neutrino N and one from Anxiously Followed Figured. Neutrino N says, yes, gents, exclamation point. In recent weeks, there has been a lot of discussion about pain points in Windows on desktop, PC handheld, and Xbox handhelds. While I haven't experienced the quote-unquote joys of Windows on handhelds, I've definitely shared your frustrations with Windows on desktop as of late. Given that, and seeing how you have covered games running on SteamOS/Bazite, has there ever been any discussion about adding Linux coverage to PC game reviews, even if only periodically? I'd be curious to hear how performance would scale up / compare with more hardware behind them. Cheers! Exclamation point. The second one, hello gentlemen! Exclamation point. Given all the kind words you said last week about Windows 11, I wanted to ask you, have you ever considered moving to Linux gaming? Apparently the driver situation is getting better every month, and even NVIDIA GPU owners are not left behind. Cheers! Exclamation point. Oliver, we're going to be looking at ASUS Xbox ROG Ally X with Bazite at some point, I suspect.
Rich.
Yes.
You just said ROG.
Oh,
Come on.
Yeah.
You got to say it. You got to say it properly.
ROG.
There we go. Yes.
Yes. Yes. Oliver, thoughts?
In terms of covering Bazite and SteamOS as a separate platform in game reviews, I mean, I don't want to speak too much for Alex here, but the logistics of adding a new platform target for game reviews introduces a lot of challenges and time costs. Producing PC content already seems challenging enough to me as an outsider when you're working within Windows, when you're trying to cover a representative sample of PC parts for those Windows boxes. Linux is another huge issue and another huge time sink. I think the way to cover Linux gaming is more to do discrete videos on Linux gaming, maybe rounding up a number of titles, talking about kind of general performance trends, talking about compatibility across titles. I think that's a better way to do it. Maybe a good way to do that as well is just through Steam Deck coverage and maybe extending that Steam Deck coverage towards higher end Linux platforms, things like that. The reality is, like, people always ask, like, oh, why didn't you cover this platform in this video? Why didn't you cover Steam Deck? Why didn't you do that? And the realities of just like adding platforms, adding modes, adding things on top of a video, it just explodes out the time. And obviously we want to produce timely content for you guys, and we do have certain time limitations on what we can do. In terms of switching over to Linux gaming, I think about switching over to Linux gaming all the time and installing Bazite on my own personal PC computer, just because that's a very good experience at the moment. What's holding me back is just the driver situation with NVIDIA GPUs. My understanding is that the driver situation with AMD GPUs is much, much better. So if I had a high-end AMD system, I think I would have already done it by now. But for now, I'm more content just to use Bazite and SteamOS on these AMD SoC type devices, on these gaming handhelds. And for the moment, at least, leave PC up to kind of a hodgepodge of Windows plus Steam Big Picture mode booting at launch, at startup, and it's a bit of a kludge, but it works okay. It works acceptably well, and you get the better NVIDIA support there.
Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on this, John?
I wouldn't move my main rig over to Linux just yet because of just lack of support for everything. But I do actually keep the Steam Deck when it's charging. There's a dock up there on my TV, and you just tap DualSense button to come on, like I said, and you're just like, bam, you're using the Steam Deck. And sometimes I do custom things in there, and so when I do find myself using SteamOS, which is Linux, of course, for games related things fairly often on there, especially for lighter games that play really well. Anything like pixel art, for instance, scales really nicely. Like with the way SteamOS works, you just bring up that side menu and you can get a perfect 4K scale, which eliminates some of the issues with games and the way that they might internally scale themselves. So I really like that, which has me thinking I would love like a proper like Steam OS based console. I mean, they tried Steam machines in the past, but like it wasn't quite ready. I think Steam OS is now good enough where if I actually just had like a dedicated machine you leave connected to your TV, it would be a nice place to play because you could still play on my main PC on Steam with Windows, but then the save would just carry over and you could use it through Steam over there on the TV as well. And I think there's a lot of potential there for something like that. It's ultimately, the Steam Deck already kind of fulfills that, but it's not quite powerful enough to provide the experience you might want, right? So maybe building out a little PC, putting Steam OS on there, not a bad idea.
Okay, yeah. My thoughts on this, I mean, I'm operating in a sort of perspective of having basically no knowledge about how SteamOS would run on a desktop PC. Obviously, I've used it on the handhelds. My concern is that when a really big AAA game with those high-end NVIDIA features comes along, if I can't use those high-end features on a Linux setup, then my interest level diminishes because I don't really want to have two operating systems set up. I just want the one. And that, by default, that kind of means it should be on Windows, right? But I can see that there's obviously a huge groundswell of support, and I think it is basically happening because, Valve has basically tailored Linux to be a really good gaming experience, and the experience on Windows has just got dramatically worse. Which is kind of why all of this is happening, I think. Maybe things will improve with Xbox sort of as it transitions to this sort of hybrid status. But if, as I said earlier, the concept is to have essentially a walled garden that is Xbox and then access to normal Windows for other stores, that situation probably won't improve that dramatically. I don't know. It's still all to play for. But, basically, Valve has got the fundamentals right, as far as I'm concerned, and Microsoft hasn't. Maybe it's time for NVIDIA to sort of more, support Linux and all of those high-end features and technologies on Linux. That would be pretty game-changing, I think. Certainly bad news for Microsoft. But let's move on. Okay, so this question comes from 10 Watts Ray Tracing. Hi, Digital Foundry! With the perspective we now have this generation of consoles, why do you think Xbox Series lost so much of its market to PlayStation 5? Neither brand shipped poor hardware design. The Series S was the cheapest, and this console generation has so few exclusives! Even before everything became an Xbox, I was wondering why they lost the console war of this generation so badly. Well, Phil Spencer himself has talked in the past about how going into this generation they were badly set up because the whole digital library thing happened last generation, and Sony basically won that. But I think there's more to it than that, right, John?
I don't think that excuse holds water completely because the Nintendo Switch came out in 2017.
Fair point, but it's a different type of product, isn't it?
No, and that's my point, is it had a selling point that to differentiate itself, which was the portable hybrid play, right? Xbox and PlayStation are just the same things from different companies. They are. Right down to the hardware inside. They're virtually the same. And I think that is why they've struggled, because neither one found a way to differentiate from one another. And since they're the same basic product, I think in that case, I see where he's coming from when he says they lost that battle with the online space, because there was nothing about Xbox that made it special to the masses over what PlayStation has. And then you kind of look at it, Sony still had that mind share of the bigger first party titles that were more celebrated, that got more like I guess general public attention, but in addition to much better Japanese support. And I think those two factors just kind of, people would say, well, I got these two products that are basically the same. I'll go with the one that has a bit more of this stuff, right? And it's really that simple, which is why I think that was ultimately why one of them, I mean, in this case, Microsoft, they really needed to find a better option that wasn't just another console that was the same thing, because clearly that ship has sailed for this sort of thing. I don't know what that would have been. I don't know what they could have done earlier. I guess they kind of went all in on the subscription stuff as like the differentiator, right? But I think that maybe it backfired for them a little bit. So maybe what they're trying to do now is what could help them there. I don't know. It really remains to be seen, but I think it is just about finding something that differentiates, because again, all the Switch did really, the Switch really is just like the Wii U, but truly portable.
Right.
The Wii U was a gigantic failure for Nintendo, and you have to think about why. And I mean, I think just the hardware was clunky. There was a lot of just like things about it that made it unappealing and confusing to the masses, right? Some people thought it was just like an extension of the Wii. Like, there's so many things that they did wrong there with the way they presented it, and they presented the feature set, that it failed. Whereas the Switch, they made very smart decisions about how to present it, as well as how to get that new feature out there. And the difference is massive, which says to me, a lot of this has to do with how you message the differences in your product, and and the need to find some hook that differentiates you from the competition. Knowing that the PS4 was very strong from the last generation, Microsoft should have known this and looked at this better. And I think the idea of just more power wasn't enough anymore. So,
I mean, just sort of going back to the heady days of 2020, where there was this huge... how can we describe it? Things kind of went a bit nuts, didn't they, John? To the point where we were getting death threats, which in retrospect,
yeah, that was a really bad time. I mean, I will say, like, the change in the way the industry has moved now has been a relief, because that sort of like bickering is largely ended.
Yeah, it's kind of anachronistic at this point. But going back to 2020, there were some issues, right? I mean, Xbox launched with a really good back compat offering, but no actual new games at launch.
Well, and then that's the thing is, like, if Sony had botched the backwards compatibility, I think that
was
actually
the thing,
would have been,
right?
That would have been one of the big things that Xbox could have pushed. But it ended up not being they ended up doing fine.
Yeah, the back compat on PS5 was basically, it didn't have any of the bells and whistles that Microsoft brought to the party. But the point is that you got the lion's share of what you would have wanted. You were able to play your games, and you were able to play them at better performance levels, which kind of, nullified that particular Microsoft advantage. And, you had stuff like Demon's Souls and Miles Morales. I mean, Miles Morales, I guess, wasn't a PS5 exclusive as such.
It showed off the tech.
Yeah, absolutely.
In a big
it's
way.
the sort,
and as Spider-Man.
Yeah, and, you wanted to play a Hot U game on the Hot U piece of hardware, right?
This is the thing. I've said this argument before. It was the Halo Infinite botch.
Right.
That's what really tanked them. If they had been able to deliver that initial vision of what Halo Infinite could have been, that very first teaser trailer, do that right, make it Xbox Series exclusive, really make it a great Halo game, paint this as like the return of Xbox, like market that right, and it could have been a gigantic thing for them.
Yeah.
And I think this all goes back to original Xbox even. I think the only reason the original Xbox actually succeeded at the time is because of Halo. If Halo had not been good, I think the system would have done far, far, far less. And I think that shows how much of a razor edge you're often riding with these products. You just got to get the right thing. And if it's just executed the right way and captures enough people, it can catapult you to huge success. And I really think they needed a Halo, and I think that's what they were trying to do. I think that's what they wanted to do with Halo Infinite, but 343 could not deliver. And that, I think, was like a domino effect thing for the whole business.
So, Oliver, you weren't with us in 2020 and therefore avoided the death threats. What was your perspective on how this has all played out?
Well, I mean, as John mentioned, a big part of it is just the lead up into Xbox Series was not very good. Obviously, you had a bunch of bungles with the Xbox One VCR, with Kinect, with reduced hardware power. Then just coming into this generation, you had a lower density of exclusive titles coming out of the Xbox Game Studios branded studios that were producing exclusive content for PC and Xbox. And then coming into this generation, I think that you did end up seeing a pretty stark divide in terms of the quality of the software that was arriving on Xbox Series versus PlayStation 5, even though PlayStation 5 has maybe not had the highest density of high-quality exclusive software relative to PS4, relative to PS3. There's still like Demon's Souls, the Spider-Man games, Rift Apart, Returnal, Forbidden West, GT7, God of War, Astrobot obviously recently, tons of games, Final Fantasy 16, tons of games that are like Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, lots of games in the mix there. Ghost of Yotei recently, lots of remasters of really highly acclaimed PS4 titles, as much as we besmirch them, as much as we don't like their priorities at times. Those games are big successes, titles like The Last of Us Part 2 remaster, titles like Ghost of Tsushima. Those are big games. On the Xbox side of things, I think you have a much more sedate schedule. Their launch titles were not very good, I would say. Just like some optimized games like Gears 5. There was like a patch for Forza Horizon 4, things like this. 2021, you had, Forza Horizon 5 in 2021 was great. Halo Infinite in 2020, or rather in 2021 was great. So was Halo Infinite. I really did enjoy Halo Infinite despite all its faults. But then there was a bit of a drought, as you might recall. In 2022, there was almost nothing into like 2023, early 2023. Then all of a sudden you have Hi-Fi Rush, a few other games. Redfall was a kind of a disaster, unfortunately. There was some, I don't need to go through the whole spiel here, but there were some really compromised efforts in there. And there was a lower density of software. And then going into early 2024, we have the infamous Just 4 Games announcement, which kind of portended the steep decline of the platform in terms of sales. I think at that point, the sales volume really probably dropped off a cliff, at least from what I can see. People were not too much into Xbox past that point. So I think that probably the game issue is a central issue that's specific to Xbox Series. Obviously, there were issues leading up to Xbox Series, but hurt the Xbox brand quite dramatically. And then I think there are some feedback loops where when you start to lose market share, maybe your shelf space, retailers are not allocating as much shelf space. You're not getting promoted as much. Maybe your gamer friends are telling you, oh, just get a PS5. Let's play this game together. Let's play, this new title together. Let's enjoy this platform together. And then at the same time, Microsoft was not nearly as aggressive as Sony was with marketing their consoles with big sales, with big, deep discounts. Sony was trying to push a PS5 on you pretty aggressively into 2022, 2023, 2024. They were bundling the consoles aggressively with sales. They were cutting prices by $50 or $100. They really wanted to move PS5 consoles, and they still want to move PS5 consoles. They've still been pretty good about keeping the price within reasonable bounds. And you look at Microsoft, who are subject to similar constraints with tariffs and things like this, they've simply chosen to maintain their margins and increase prices in the wake of those tariffs, whereas Sony is trying to still fight it out for every possible margin of market share, which shows a different attitude in pushing consoles and a much more aggressive attitude that's been much more successful.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. Yeah, there's a lot of factors there. I think that's the takeaway, really, isn't it? There's a lot of factors there. Okay, let's move on. This question comes from Glenn, and it's refreshing not to have a comedy alias. Hello, exclamation point. I'm interested in alternative hypotheses about the PS5 power saving mode. There's something fishy about the idea of a 100-watt mode being relevant for a handheld machine. We'll talk about that shortly. Consider the recent rumor that the PS Portal will soon play games via the cloud, i.e. you won't need to own a PS5 to play the Portal. So maybe the point is for Sony's cloud streaming services to use PS5s running the power saver mode. This would be similar to what Xbox does. Their cloud gaming uses the Series X hardware running the Series S version of the game. This sounds somewhat believable to me, but the question is why the mode would be enabled on consumer devices. All the best, Glenn. I'm going to quickly tackle this one. First of all, let's talk about the 100-watt mode being relevant for a handheld machine. I'm literally at this moment got our automated benchmarking system benchmarking Ally X, not the Xbox one, the preceding one, and it's running in handheld mode. It's running in portable mode. It's not plugged in. The APU is set to 25 watt TDP. However, the battery draw is showing 42 watts. So 42 watts entire system draw is happening there for an APU running at 25 watts, right? Now, the thing to bear in mind with the new presumed handheld is that it is running on a new GPU architecture, presumably via some sort of ISA backcompat. But crucially, it's going to be on a much more efficient process node. So when you're looking at the PlayStation 5 running these power saver mode games at 100 watts, like for like on a prospective handheld, the power draw will be much, much lower. And, 40 to 50 watts is conceivable, but it's probably conceivable for a docks mode, right? So, if there have been rumors that the handheld will also run docked. If it's plugged in, it basically has access to unlimited power. You can run the APU at much higher power draw, much higher, and therefore much higher clocks, better performance, etc. So maybe that is what the power saver mode is doing, a prospective sort of docked configuration. And then there'll be a lower mode, possibly a 15 watt APU mode that would be running at 1080p rather than 1440p as we've seen from Power Saver. Just a theory, but I was talking about that the other day with the Forks, the handheld specialist. That was kind of like his thoughts on that as well. The cloud thing kind of makes sense in the developer documentation for the Power Saver mode. It does talk about how it's got to run on the cloud. The question there is that a lot of these games are now taking 60 FPS modes and running them at 30, which actually introduces a lot of latency, which isn't great for the cloud experience. So, possibly, but it's also not mandatory. Developers don't have to support it. So in those modes, it's still going to be the full 200 odd watt experience that's going to be streamed to you. That's my thoughts on it at the moment. The question is why the mode would be enabled on consumer devices. Well, if the work is going in for whatever reason, you can present your green credentials, right? Even if very few people are going to be using it, the fact is it's there and it is laudable. Oliver, what do you make of all of this?
Yeah, I certainly think on the handheld side of things that new process technologies are going to save you there. And in particular, when you look at the kind of limitations that you might experience on a PS6 handheld, on a handheld next generation PlayStation, I think in terms of GPU compute, it's going to be a lot closer to a PS5 than it will be in terms of bandwidth, than it will be in terms of CPU configuration necessarily, in terms of having that full 8-core allocation that will have like a 4+2 allocation or something like that, with the 2 being low power cores and maybe the rest being Zen 6C cores. I think that does really strongly resemble the lineup of compromises that Sony has made for the low power mode. So I think it just makes a lot of sense. That would be kind of a proving ground for developers to get to grips with the realities of shipping a game on reduced capability hardware, like you've mentioned many times. In terms of the cloud issue, I agree. The fact that you're shipping a game at 30 FPS, in many cases in these low power modes, does not really suggest a very fruitful future in a streamed experience. And I'd also think that, saving maybe if you're in a relatively inexpensive area for power, you might only be saving about 1 cent or maybe 2 cents per hour of gameplay streamed if you actually do run that hardware at 100 watts instead of 200 watts. I could see it having more of a role if they were able to have specialty server hardware or some kind of commodity hardware perhaps based off of the handheld hardware that could run that software in a more area efficient manner using these low power modes. That will be one potential in order to save some money, just like Microsoft does with their kind of Series X hardware running to Series S's. That would certainly be one avenue they could go down. But at the moment, I do think that low power mode is a little bit questionable, but I think the thing that makes the most sense is that it is a proving ground for the next generation handheld, but it doesn't directly map on to necessarily any particular mode that the handheld might run. Although I would imagine, given that it's binary compatible, it can probably run those handheld modes, those low power saving modes. But I don't think they're practical for the device.
Mm-hmm. John, any thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, I was thinking about this. If let's say you've got huge numbers of people playing forever games like Fortnite, Rocket League, whatever on a PlayStation. If those games, for instance, were to default to like a power save mode across like millions and millions of players, there's something to be said for some power savings or like some kind of small impact on the overall footprint that the PS5 leaves, right? because in most of these cases, people playing them, you're not going to need the full power of the system to enjoy them anyway. So I could see a point where it's like mass adoption of a power saver mode being useful for those types of games. Beyond that, though, I mean, everything else you've kind of theorized, I kind of agree with. I see it.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, let's move on. Final question of the show. Actually, it's two questions, same topic, really. Two questions. Let's start with the one from Skyrim Fest 26, in brackets AI upscaled. And we got a second question from Mezeb Chowdhury. Skyrim says, Apple's M5 chip seems to have upgraded the base model GPU in a big way. With game porting toolkit and more native games than ever, is a base MacBook Pro now a pretty decent gaming laptop that also has amazing battery life and portability? Mr. Chowdhury's question, greetings DF team. Apple has just joined the Game Awards advisory board. There's an advisory board?
I didn't know that.
Wow. And with its M5 processors is now pushing AAA support on Apple Silicon. At the same time, they're actively reshaping Apple Arcade. All of this begs a critical question. Is Apple serious about gaming now? That's the perennial question, isn't it? Do you see this as a symbolic PR move or a real shift in platform ambition? And are we genuinely on track to play GTA 6 on a future M-series iPad? Thanks as always for the great work. So Oliver, you're our Macintosh man. Thoughts?
Macin man.
Yeah, I think Apple wants to be somewhere in gaming, but I don't know the extent to which they're aiming, that they're interested in gaming as it's currently constituted, or if they're more interested in it as a proving ground to create technologies for VR and XR devices. Obviously, we have the Vision Pro device. That is a big effort within Apple. You have rumors about XR devices, maybe some kind of Ray-Ban style glasses that you'd wear that have some kind of virtual display, have some XR capabilities, have cameras built into them that you'd wear in everyday life. Maybe there would be some games or interactive experiences that would run in that kind of headset. I don't think you can build a successful games business or a successful interactive media business necessarily on a VR or XR headset without a ton of work put into graphics APIs, without a ton of work put into new machine learning features. I think that's realistically what's needed, especially considering the limited power that's present on these devices. Mostly we're talking about mobile silicon, right? Even in the Vision Pro, which is very fast, we're still talking about an M5, which is not the most powerful hardware. Certainly VR hardware in the PC space is much more capable than that typically. I don't think they see as much of a future in other avenues for high-end gaming in the phones or in the Macs. And they seem to have hibernated their phone gaming ambitions for now. If you recall, back 2 years ago, there was a huge push into phone gaming with titles like Resident Evil 7, with titles like Death Stranding, Assassin's Creed Mirage, tons of games that were being ported over to mobile. That has slowed down to a trickle as far as I can tell. Those titles, which may have had some level of Apple sponsorship or Apple co-development, those have slowed to a crawl, have basically stopped at this point. In Mac gaming, that seems to still be kind of kicking up a little bit. Obviously, we had Cyberpunk earlier this year. They seem a little bit more interested in that market. But if you look at the size and the volume of titles that are being sold on Mac, that is a much smaller total addressable market than it would be on the phones. So you'd think the upside potential on the phones would be higher. Again, we've heard some reports that maybe the sales on those phone titles are not so high. So in either case, I think Apple's interest in gaming and their interest in gaming technologies is more about paving a pathway for the future than trying to get their hands in like the console market. It's not an Apple-like market. It's a low-margin market. It's a selling hardware to loss market. There are a million elements. It's an exclusives-dominated market. There are a million reasons why Apple probably does not want to step into that in a really fulsome way. But there are also a million reasons why they don't want to have those technologies ready for the next generation of gaming experiences.
Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on the M5? Because it does seem to have had a big GPU upgrade.
Yeah, I've seen reports that different kinds of workloads, in ray tracing, it's massively faster. In traditional raster, it's like maybe 40%, 50% faster than the outgoing model, potentially, the outgoing M4 model. It is considerably faster. And then in machine learning operations, it has the Apple equivalent of the Tensor Core as well. It has some machine learning acceleration that's actually built into the graphics cores, not present as part of the neural engine. That's a separate component for more low power machine learning processing. So there's a massive increase in the capability of this device to do machine learning maths. which is quite interesting. And I'm definitely interested to see how that extends to the higher end products as well, especially as has been rumored, we might actually see more chiplet based designs for the Max products, for the Ultra products, potentially within the M5 lineup of chips. We might actually see chiplet based designs as opposed to the old designs where you had a mix of monolithic chips and then two monolithic chips connected over an interposer for that Ultra design, which had some kind of not ideal scaling at times, I would say.
Okay, so I think we're going to be taking a look at the M5 at some point because it does look quite exciting, but that's it for now. And that is the final question, therefore the end of the show. So please do like, subscribe, share. If you enjoyed it, ring bells for notifications for you and potentially illusory algorithmic boosts for us. We just don't know, but do ring that bell. Patreon.com/digitalfoundry to support us. That would be great. Store.digitalfoundry.net to access our range of merchandising wares. But that's all from us on this one. Thanks for watching DF Direct Weekly this week. And inevitably, we shall see you next week.